Hello, and welcome to the 19th episode of the LI Law Podcast. I am your host, Zehava Schechter. The premise of this podcast is to feature issues, developments, and topics affecting the law and how it relates to the 8 million of us who live or work on Long Island, New York, which includes Nassau, Suffolk, Queens, and Kings counties. If you live or work on Long Island, this podcast on local and state legislative and judicial decisions is for you. Our guest on this very special 19th episode is Carl Gerrato, community activist for Nassau County Legislative District 8, which includes Elmont, Franklin Square, and West Hempstead, as well as Town of Hempstead sections of the villages of Belrose Terrace, Floral Park, and New Hyde Park, and the village of Stewart Manor. Carl is also trustee of the Franklin Square Public Library, board member of the Central Nassau Rotary Club, a current Nassau County Corrections Officer, and a former volunteer firefighter, as well as a 9/11 hero. Today, Carl and I will be discussing the candidate forum held on October 10th, 2019 at the Franklin Square Public Library, the candidates who attended and those who did not attend, the issues they discussed, and what is at stake for residents of the town of Hempstead and Nassau County. We will also give you locations for where to vote early. Election Day is Tuesday, November 5th, 2019, so be sure to vote. Please check out the show notes for Carl's contact information. Please keep in mind that we will not be providing legal advice to any specific questions. Carl, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so let's first talk about the forum itself. I'm not telling any secrets here when I say it was poorly attended. Granted, there was a conflicting event at the same time at Malloy College, but that was really only for the town supervisor position. So, Carl, why do you think so few people attended the Franklin Square Forum?
Well, I think one of the main reasons was we had to move the date because it conflicted with another forum. Now with the early voting, forums have been popping up all over, so it becomes a bit of a scheduling nightmare. So I think once we rescheduled and then we had to move the time, kind of threw people off a little bit.
Okay, so you don't chalk this up to voter apathy or lack of interest?
Not entirely. Most of the voters in the area are pretty well up on what's going on. What's happening right now, though, like I said, with the early voting, people are just a little all over the place with that kind of stuff. But no, it wasn't apathy. Last year we had a larger amount because it also depends on the race. I mean, when you have a county executive race, obviously you're going to have a lot more interest. Town of Hempstead race, as you saw, people did stay, even though they were running late, did stay to ask questions, and they did show up, which was important as well.
Oh, definitely. The people who came were committed and interested in hearing what the candidates had to say. So let's start at the top of the ticket, which is Town of Hempstead Supervisor. The candidates there are Laura Gillen from the Democratic Party, Donald Clavin from the Republican Party, and Diane Madden, a Libertarian. And we'll start by talking about Don Clavin, who was a no-show. What do you think was happening there?
Well, I can't speak for him, so I honestly don't know, but if you know the area, you know it's largely Republican. So my belief that those that didn't show up don't really understand the area and think that people are just going to vote their way.
Did you think that was disrespectful at all?
Well, as someone who had run for office, I tried my best to make sure I was at everything I was invited to. To decline a candidate's forum or not to show up at a candidate forum, yeah, I find that very disrespectful.
Let's go back to your run for elected office. What did you run for and when?
I ran twice against Vinnie Muscarella for legislator in LD8. Actually, 3 times. I tried in 2013, but I was sued off the ballot, which was interesting. And then I came back in 2015. And for my first official run on the ballot, did quite well, even though it's a 2-to-1 Republican majority. Then I ran again in 17, and I did extremely better than I had. I turned many areas in LD8 purple.
That's Legislative District.
Legislative District 8 for Nassau County, yes.
So let's talk about Laura Gillen and Diane Madden, who did attend. First, about Laura Gillen. How do you think she did?
Well, I have to say, I haven't heard Don Clavin speak on any of the issues other than the stuff I've seen on Facebook and on the news. This was the first time I've seen her in this run speak, and she was very on point. I mean, especially with the question that was asked about the budget. She knew her numbers. She knew exactly what was going on. And she wasn't afraid to call things out, which I thought was very important.
Right. I also thought she was honest when she admitted she couldn't get all of her agenda done. She said, I tried to do the best I could. I don't have all the votes. I thought that was honest of her.
Well, that was very important because she needs to stress to the voters how obstructional the town board is. I mean, they've voted away most of her power. They've voted away. She couldn't even appoint people. She couldn't appoint commissioners or anything.
Right.
Because they're all appointed by the town board. And if they have the majority, obviously they're going to vote how they want. They wanted...
And currently, the town of Hempstead board is primarily Republican.
Yes, it is. But you got to understand, if you've ever been to a town of Hempstead board meeting, it's very partisan. And they wanted to keep the status quo. And that's what this election is, about keeping the status quo.
Or not.
Or not. Well, my hope is that she gets a couple of town board members that are able to move things forward.
Okay, well, without taking partisan
Right. No.
positions here, we all, I think that town of Hempstead needs to move forward and
Yes.
not be stuck
Oh, absolutely.
in this partisan fight. What do you think about her attempts to get an independent audit of the building department?
Well, I think it's a long time in coming. If you've ever dealt with the town of Hempstead building department, it can be somewhat of an arduous task. So any good manager, I would assume, especially when you take office, would like to have an audit of your areas that need fixing. Because how are you going to fix it unless you have an audit to know what's going on? Like she said, and I agree with her as much as some of the other, you can't fix a problem with the people that have created the problem.
Correct. And also, you can't fix a problem when you're not even sure what the problem is.
Right.
We see the consequences, but where we could fix it or improve the system, that has not been shown to us yet. I also want to go back to what you said about the budget, because there was a question to her about a tax hike, and a lot of the literature I'm receiving is about Laura Gillen raising our taxes. Is that correct?
I never look at that paper, any of the stuff you get in the mail, because there's always two sides to everything. Now, personally, I think the one thing they had brought up was in the budget was about the attrition of employees,
Right.
and how they were artificially putting stuff in there to look like they were getting a tax cut, even though they're having to pay the large subsidies when people leave. Severances packages when
Yep.
they leave. So the budget is very artificial. It's in flux most of the time. But the biggest issue I'm having with the budget is the fact that she's very transparent with it. If you've noticed, she's having a lot of budget. That's where I was actually planning on going to one of her budget hearings that she's having. So at least we have an idea and can ask those questions, because it is very complicated, the town budget.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Rath Park for a minute.
Oh,
because
yes.
I know you're so active in Franklin Square. Can you explain to our listeners what the issues are involving that park?
Well, Rath Park, if you don't know, is in Franklin Square, and it is what they call a special parks taxing district, which means the park, there is 4 parks, we come to find out, in the Franklin Square Parks District. It's Rath Park, it's Cherry Valley Park on Nassau Boulevard, there's the Cherry Valley baseball fields on Cherry Valley Avenue, and there's a small little pocket park on Cromwell over in Malverne, which is all part of the Parks District. Basically what it means is, if you are a resident of Franklin Square, you pay taxes directly to the Parks District, not to the town of Hempstead. So I'll give you an example. I belong to Rath Park, but if I chose to want to go to Echo Park, I am a non-town of Hempstead resident, because I do not live technically in the town of Hempstead. I'm in a special parks district. And there's several of them in the town.
I just want to say that there was a great deal of discussion about
Oh,
Rath
yeah.
Park at this meeting, and some of the things that Laura Gillen said, I wasn't quite sure I understood. She said she wanted to meet with community leaders.
She has.
And she has. So
Yes.
what are those efforts?
So what's happened is there's been an effort by many people in the community to fix the park. The park has been neglected for many years. There's no arguing in any of that.
So what are some of the things that Laura Gillen has done about Rath Park?
Well, she's had several meetings, and they've allocated about $300,000 to the park for repairs. So that's what's presently in the process. That's what she was talking about.
Is that sufficient?
Well, it's what we have, because we're a special taxing district, so that's what we have available within the money we've been taxed.
Okay. All right. We can go on to that
That's
another
fine.
time.
That's
Let's
fine.
talk about Diane Madden, the libertarian, who started talking about her work in the shelters, the animal shelters. I don't know much about her. Do you know about her?
Well, I know Diane. Diane's a lovely woman, and she's very, very much active in the community with the animals, especially at the shelter. So she has a huge understanding of what's issues with the shelter. She's a good person. She's run for public office before. I just don't think that this is the right race for her. I think she would have been great as a council person, personally.
Okay. I was also reading about money. We're going to talk about that later. She has not yet filed a campaign finance report.
Yeah, they file in July and January, so she may have
missed that deadline
because she may not have had any funds at that time.
So I wonder why she's running now, because it seems to me, if we look back at higher races, when you have a spoiler come in, usually it takes votes away from at least one of the candidates.
Yeah.
And I think if anyone's going to lose votes here, it's going to be Laura Gillen.
It's very possible.
So do you think this is Diane Madden's way of putting a kibosh on Laura Gillen?
I hope not. A lot of times when you run for office and you're the third party candidate, sometimes it's not always about winning, but it's about creating a conversation. Mm-hmm. It's about getting an issue out that you're passionate about and getting people to talk about it. So sometimes it's not always about spoiling an election. It's about enhancing the issues in an election. And I think that's basically what she's trying to do.
I think you said that very well. And she did come across as very genuine and very pleasant. I actually spoke with her for a few minutes afterwards. And I think you're right. I hope if this race doesn't work for her, hopefully she'll run again. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next race, which is Town of Hempstead Town Clerk. Sylvia Cabana is the Democratic candidate and Kate Murray is the Republican. Kate Murray did not attend the event. Again, another no-show. And I want to start to ask you, Carl, number one, why do you think she didn't show up? And second, isn't this sort of a come down from her after being Town of Hempstead supervisor so many years? Why would she run for town clerk?
Here's how I look at it. Sylvia Cabana is liked, I believe, universally on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat. She's gotten a lot done in the town clerk's office. And Kate Murray, I don't know why she's running, truthfully. I couldn't honestly put a finger on that, because is it a come down? Maybe. Or maybe they just couldn't find anybody willing to run against Sylvia. I don't know.
Well, why didn't she show up?
Well, I think it comes down to the same thing with a lot of the other ones that didn't show up. They take the people in Franklin Square area for granted that they're going to vote their way. And there's also a lot of Islander fans in Franklin Square, so I'm sure that may have been a bit of a deterrent as well.
Because there was a game on at the same time.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about Sylvia Cabana. And one of the things that she stressed was her goal of making town services more accessible and transparent, including passports and destination weddings and credit card machines. And she talked about the calendar. She tried to get a calendar online, but that did not work. How do you think she's done so far?
Well, personally, I've used her services for passports at the town hall, and it was seamless. It was quite easy to get done. I have to say that. As far as the destination weddings, I've seen quite a few of them that she's done. The thing I saw her speak, I can't remember exactly where it was, but she was talking about trying to modernize the town clerk's office, and they're still using typewriters. That's how far out of date the town of Hempstead is. Now, if you look at it historically, Kate Murray used to be the town clerk at one point, and she's talked about how she did all these wonderful things to modernize it. Yeah, well, Sylvia came in and they still got typewriters. So how much modern could the last two town clerks have been?
Right. So why are they still using paper? Is the budget not sufficient to account for computers?
That's something you would have to try to figure out from them. My personal opinion is status quo. It's easier. Bureaucracy is built on paper. And when you modernize and streamline things, there's no more bureaucracy. Things move forward.
Meaning some employees would be let go, so the patronage positions
they have
would
to
not
feed
be
the
there.
machine.
So now we're moving on to Town of Hempstead council members. That is a race between Thomas Muscarella, who is the brother of Vincent Muscarella, as well as a Town of Oyster Bay councilman, and Thomas Tweedy, who is the former mayor of Floral Park, or is he current mayor?
No, he's former mayor.
Former mayor. Okay, so what did you think of, again, Thomas Muscarella the Republican candidate, did not attend. What's that all about?
Taking the area for granted.
Well, that's interesting for him because he was put in by the Republican Party after Ed Ambrosino had to step down due to corruption charges. You would think he wouldn't take people for granted. People don't know him so well.
Well, they know the name. If you notice, a lot of the times what they do is they're going to pick a name that everyone knows, Kate Murray, Muscarella, things that are easy for, oh, I know that name. Because that's a lot of people vote by the name, not by.
So we're dumbing down the legislature.
It goes back to what I said before. They take the voters for granted that they're just going to vote a party line. I mean, I never voted a party line. I was always up and down depending on the person, because I vote the person, not the politics.
I agree with you.
And there's a lot of good people here. They've done a lot of good things. I think that a lot of times it just becomes complacent. And I think the problem with Tom Muscarella not showing up is he lives in the area. He knows the people. He should have had the decency to show up and speak. If you remember, Tom Tweedy, when he was speaking, said every time they've had a debate, he's not shown up for it. That concerns me. Why won't you debate your opponent?
Right. Is he afraid?
I don't know if he's afraid or he's maybe not up on the issues as well as Tom Tweedy is, because if you heard how he spoke, he was very articulate on the agenda and things that need to be done.
Yes.
He was very up on the issues of the area.
Okay, so let's get to Tom Tweedy, because I agree with you. He was very impressive. Mayor of Floral Park, town of Hempstead, lifelong resident. He's the mayor for 16 years. He said that his bond rating was the highest ever. He talked about the fact that he's a Republican, by the way.
Yes.
And he's running on the Democratic line because he's just fed up with all the corruption in the town. And he wants to make a difference. He wants to bring back honorable, responsive, and accountable government, which...
Well, I can understand.
Can't everyone agree with that?
I can understand, because when I originally ran in 2013, I was a Republican, and I ran on the Democratic line because he uses a line, and I agree with it. He didn't leave the Republican Party. The Republican Party left him. And I kind of agree with that. When you're on the Republican side, you become a rhino. I don't know if you know what that is. Republican in name only. You just have, you don't vote the Republican line. You start voting the people. You start looking at what works best. And I understand where he's coming from, because I was there at one point. And you look at the corruption all around you and go, how can I support this anymore?
Exactly.
It makes no sense. And I think he's very much of a common sense candidate. I think he brought a lot of common sense to how to move the town forward.
I was also impressed by his speech. He was civil. He treats people as colleagues. He talked about the need for bipartisanship, for reaching across the aisle, for getting things done, and leaving politics behind.
I agree with that. And when I ran, and I think Tom's the same way. You're running as a Democrat, but you understand the Republicans, and I think that's important, because if you don't build a bridge between both sides, everything will stagnate. There was a phrase I used. I forgot who said it. I'm gonna say it was President Eisenhower that said, when you're building the interstate road system, if you want to move anything forward, you go too far to the left or too far to the right, you're in a ditch. You got to be in the middle of the road to move things forward. And I kind of agree with that. I think we have to understand both sides to move forward. And I wish Tom Muscarella was there. I would have loved to have heard. I've not really heard him speak on any issues, and I would have loved to have, because I'm open.
Right, me too. You want to make an informed decision,
Yes.
and when only one candidate shows up, I think of that, frankly, as lack of respect, as well as losing a wonderful opportunity to show us, his constituents, and I am one, why he is the best choice.
And what I think you were talking about, there was not that many people. There was about, 20 people.
Correct.
But those 20 people know 20 people who know 20 people who know, and it just exponentially grows from there. And with the advent of social media, it expands even further from there. And I think that was why they start taking the electorate for granted. That, there's only going to be 10 people. Who cares? You know what? Those 10 people talk. and they were dedicated enough to stay as late as they did. So they really want to know what the issues are, and that's taking us for granted.
Right. We stayed till at least 10 p.m., so that was a long evening. And I want to jump now, since we're talking about a Muscarella, I want to talk about another Muscarella, Vincent Muscarella, who is running against Barbara Hafner for Nassau County Legislator and in District 8. And in as much as we talked about Tom Tweedy and his civil tone, I must say I was very impressed by how Vinnie Muscarella talked about Barbara Hafner.
Well, he did the same thing when I ran.
Okay, but I want to say he was very polite.
Yes,
and he even said,
he's a nice person.
He even said, if the district votes in Barbara Hafner, she's a lovely woman, she does a good job. Even if it was a show, I'd like to see the civility, and I'd like to see the kinder, gentler way of speaking, and not this negativity that we see in the election.
He said the same thing when I ran. He said when I ran that if I won, the LDA would be getting a person that's very dedicated to the community. He said the same. And
which is true.
Well, I thank you very much. But I agree with that. But in some respects, it also undercuts when somebody has something harsh to want to say about I won't use him as an example, but just say any candidate, and someone praises you. It's hard for you to go back at them when they're doing something that you may not agree with, because then you look bad.
Well, I think Barbara Hafner did that well.
Yes.
We're going to get to Barbara Hafner in a minute. But let's talk about Vincent Muscarella. He's been in office 24 years. He was a New York State Assemblyman before that. He talked a lot about his work on infrastructure and transportation. And there was a question to him about whether Franklin Square is a dump, forgive me for saying that, because of so many rentals, and that it's really been neglected.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Did he have a good answer to that? So what did he say, and why is it not good?
If you recall, he was passing it off to the state and the town, and I find that very disingenuous, because a similar question came up when we ran against each other, and my response was I had two responses to that. As an elected official, whether you're a county official, a town official, a state official, you represent the people in your area. So if someone comes to you as a county official and they say, listen, Hempstead Turnpike is XYZ, well, then you have a responsibility to say, you know what, call these people, but I will follow up and I will get back to you. To me, it was much passing the buck. He didn't come up with a direct answer.
Right. If you recall, I told him that the road on which I live, which is a Nassau County road, we were trying to get stop signs or some other kind of
light, yes.
or a light, and that we're having trouble. I'm having trouble even after a FOIL request, Freedom of Information law, getting anything from the commissioner's office. And his response to me was that the legislature cannot do anything about the actual department commissioners.
Okay.
And I was very surprised at that. And I did follow up with him. If he is my representative, right? I'm a constituent of his. Why doesn't he even want to try? He didn't even make an effort. He didn't say, I'll follow up, I'll look. And he knows it's more than 5 years we're trying to get these signs.
The fact that he knew about it and couldn't even give a good response to it was quite telling. As an elected official, as anyone should be, you should be very cognizant of that. And the first words he should have said was, you know what? Give me your information. I will have someone from my office call you.
Exactly. Wouldn't that have been easy? So why didn't he do it?
That's something you have to ask him.
No, I mean, we talk about complacency. Does he not care?
I don't think he does. Listen, I believe he cares. I just believe that after 24 years, what's the point? Battling, you know what I'm saying? You just become so...
But he talked about the roads a lot, and even in
which,
the
if you drive these roads, are not the best.
Right. Even in the Dogwood area, there's potholes.
Yes.
They're dangerous. They're not getting fixed. Again, as you said, he passed the buck to the town, to the state.
If he was really doing anything or really cared, or any elected official for that matter, they would say, listen, this is what I've done. I've called this person. I am on their back about X, Y, and Z. Don't always say, listen, well, you have to call and file that. You're my elected official. You should be filing for me.
Exactly.
And getting back to me. We all file.
That's right. I thought he spent a lot of time talking about his family, which it's very lovely that he, had a loving family, and his father instilled in them the importance of public service. But I'm more interested in what he can do for me.
Right.
And not for me.
Of the situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I agree.
Help me on my road. So let's go to Barbara Hafner, who is soft-spoken. I thought. I don't know if you did.
She's a teacher, so
She's a teacher. Very polite, very genteel woman, but has no political experience. What do you think of her?
Here's how I look at it. Someone that had no political experience when I ran. That's what you need nowadays. You need somebody that's going to think outside the box. The one thing you failed to mention, and I'm sure you were going to get to it, is she's a union president.
Correct.
She's very involved in the labor negotiations. Now, if you're going to be a legislator, labor negotiations are important because you need to negotiate with both sides. And
right.
that is a very important aspect I think she brings to the table.
She did bring up her experience as a labor negotiator, and don't take what I'm saying the wrong way. If it were up to me, I'd throw everybody out. Everybody would be new, and hopefully we could get something done. But I'm just wondering, despite what we've said about Vincent Muscarella, is there a benefit to having someone who knows how to play the system, or is he just not putting in the effort?
Here's how I equate that, and I will use my favorite line from Albert Einstein about insanity: doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. You'll never fix Nassau County, the town of Hempstead, or anything else if you keep putting the same people in decade after decade, because they are entrenched like a tick. They're not going to get out. You're not going to fix the problem.
Not
voluntarily. You're not going to fix the problem. If you don't have people who are novice, because everyone was a novice when they ran at one point, if you don't have them get in and try to fix the problem, we're never going to go anywhere.
I agree with you, and I want to go back to what you said about Vincent Muscarella being so polite to you as well as to Barbara Hafner. I thought she finessed that beautifully. She was kind back to him, and yet she hit every point that he made about why he was not being effective well. Did you think she carried her own?
She carried herself very well. Absolutely. And the thing that I thought was very interesting since we're discussing this particular race is when they asked him, well, what he has done. But he never, if you noticed, he never said a specific bill he ever sponsored.
Correct.
He just talked about the bills he voted on to approve. Because
and many of them from years ago too. Not
yes,
even
many. Now it was very funny when
and not even bipartisan. Many of them were just Republican sponsored from years ago, from Santino, from Murray.
Yeah, everything. Now, here's how I look at things, especially now with social media. I ask everyone to Google the person who's running and see what they have up there. If you Google Vinny, he's a nice guy. I like him. We've known each other a long time. You're not going to find much because there's nothing there. You Google Barbara, you'll see all her stuff that she's been putting out on Facebook and everything else, all the stuff she wants to bring forward, because that's the way things are nowadays. He's a nice guy. He's been there too long. We need somebody that's going to look at things a little differently.
Okay. Let's move on to the next race, and actually our last race from the candidate forum, which is the Town of Hempstead Council. Bruce Blakeman, Republican, versus Shari James Pierre, Democrat. Let's start with Bruce Blakeman. What do you think of him?
Much like Vinny, been there too long. He's very, how can I put it? He's a nice guy.
I thought he got upset. It was almost like as Shari James brought up different issues. She got under his skin and was even able to push back on a lot of what he said. And instead of taking it with grace, he got nasty. He got nasty. Yes.
He got very bombastic. And
what was
very
the purpose of that?
Because she got under his skin. Here is now a novice. She's a very intelligent woman.
Extremely.
She was able to pinpoint specific issues and get them right out there and got under his skin. And he did not know how to react.
No, he didn't. And she was deputy comptroller of Nassau County, and she has experience at J.P. Morgan, Price Waterhouse. So it's not like she comes with no experience. She does have experience both in the public and private sectors. And yet he was unable to really handle her comments about the roads, the parks needing investment, empty storefronts.
Well, he wasn't even discuss. It was funny about the roads, since we bring up roads because roads are always an issue. The one thing he should have brought up is what Laura Gillen had done to. Remember how he was talking about, those that don't know, he was talking about how the roads were examined by somebody would go out and assess them. And well, that was coming down to who had the political clout to get their road done.
Correct.
So Laura Gillen, what she did is had them take this truck out that digitally and electronically monitors the street and ranks the streets. So it takes the human factor out. It's done by an algorithm. That was annoying him because then he can say,
Right.
look what I've done.
Exactly. He tried to take credit for that.
Yes.
And Sherry James pushed back at him and said, no, it was Laura Gillen's plan. It wasn't you.
Exactly. That was anything good that that's been done in this administration, they're going to take credit for.
The other thing he talked about, which I thought was interesting, was the bus routes. He started talking about bus routes and how there is not a Long Island Railroad station in Franklin Square.
Yeah,
or
and there never will be because we don't have a railroad in Franklin Square.
Exactly right. So he was talking about the nice bus and how wonderful it is. I just thought, I didn't understand the relevance of that.
There was no relevance because what happened was he was talking about a full-time train station, thinking that we were going to have one in Franklin Square, which obviously we can't. But he had to try to link the misstep that he said with the railroad.
Yeah.
So it was trying to connect the dots.
He also seemed to be reactive, meaning whatever the issues are, we'll fix them, as opposed to Sherry James, who I thought was proactive. Yes. I'm not in that district, but I thought she was very proactive. Let's get ahead of the problems and try to figure out what's not working before something happens.
Well, that comes down to complacency, like we've been talking about for the whole thing. People that have been there for a while are complacent. We'll fix it when someone tells us about it. Not walk your district and find out what's going on. I mean, he's got to drive these roads. He's got to see what's going on and say, how can you, by us, Shira Boulevard is a nightmare. He sent a letter to all the people in Franklin Square that it's going to be fixed in the next 30 days. You remember he said it's going to
How is that going to happen?
It's going to you know what? You know why he said it? Because it's right before election day.
Exactly, but how is that really going to happen?
It's not. And because what's going to happen is if he gets reelected, November's passed. Oh well, the road didn't get fixed, and then everyone will complain again. There's never any respect for the people in the community. It's all about kicking the can down the road to the next election cycle. That's all they do. They're complacent. We need to shake it up and get some new people that are willing to think outside the box and say, listen, let's be more proactive instead of reactive. Most government, county, town, state, is always reactive. There's very few that are proactive. There's a few electeds that are very proactive, but most of them are very reactive. Oh, so-and-so complained, let's go fix it.
Right.
Well, you should have known about that road a year ago.
I agree, and actually, I don't want to belabor the point. But one of the things Bruce Blakeman talked about was how we need to make our downtowns people friendly, so that people hang out. And I just want to say that one of the reasons I think so many millennials are leaving is not because our downtowns aren't friendly with bars, etc., but because the prices here are too high. The prices for real estate. And so maybe if you go to Garden City, it's nice. They have bars, they have restaurants that are open. But if you can't afford to live here, you're not going to be doing that.
I'll give you an example. When I was running for legislator, I spoke to a lot of seniors that live in the community. And if seniors don't move, you don't have young people moving in. So I kind of was asking what was going on. And they would say, well, why would I leave my house where I'd have to pay just as amount of a mortgage to go to a senior community? I might as well stay here. So if your communities are aging out and you don't have affordable housing for the younger people moving in. Now, I'll give you an example. My son had a tough time finding a house. They finally found a house. My daughter, who's getting married, is looking for a house, cannot find anything within where they want to live because they love the community around here, but it's almost impossible to live. We need to start looking at more, like when they were doing Belmont, I was kind of hoping they were going to put some more commuter-based housing, for the millennials. Much I think Valley Stream is doing something similar to that. Anywhere, you notice though, a lot of times, villages will do more for that because they have more control. See, you see people that say, well, let's make Franklin Square a village. Well, we can't. Because if we became a village now, we would have no authority over any zonings or anything else, which is what you want a village to be able to do.
Correct.
So if we don't have that authority, becoming a village is just useless. The villages, Rockville Center is an example. They've built up their downtown to bring more millennials in. Valley Stream is doing it because they're a community.
I just want to say about Rockville Center, their train stop for the Long Island Railroad goes right through their downtown.
Yes.
So it's an easy way for millennials to not have to drive, get on the train, go to work in the city, come back, and enjoy the nightlife. That's something
Exactly.
Franklin Square doesn't have.
We don't have that. We are a corridor community. You know, if those that don't know, we just have, people pass through. Now, I think, though, my personal opinion is, with Belmont being redeveloped and Uniondale being redeveloped at the Coliseum and everything, Elmont, Franklin Square, West Hempstead, all the corridor communities through Uniondale, all the way there, have an opportunity for a revitalization because everyone will be traveling from one point or the other down Hempstead Turnpike.
I think this is a great discussion. We're going to talk about that another time.
That's fine.
Want to talk about two more things.
Sure.
Involving these elections. One is that Ed Ambrosino, who we discussed had to step down as councilman of town of Hempstead, he was convicted. Actually, he pled guilty to a tax evasion charge. He requested that sentencing be delayed until after the election. And I wanted to talk about that because...
As did Ed Mangano.
And I wanted to talk about that because I don't know. Do you think that's fair, Carl? He says he's not trying to affect the election.
That's exactly what he's doing.
Yeah, it seems to me that if he is sentenced to jail time, that's just going to play into the Democrats.
Well, absolutely. They're going to play it anyway, but let's get realistic. They do that, and they've done it. If you notice, when Mangano was on trial or whatever, they would always delay it till after Election Day to where the trial would start or the next section of the trials would start. They always do that because the judges don't want to affect the outcome of an election or be feared that they're affecting.
But here it didn't come from the judge. It came from Ed Ambrosino.
Because he's a key player in the town of Hempstead, and it would affect the election, and it's going to affect the election because let's get realistic. That was a problem.
Yeah, it is a problem. I also
look at the town of Hempstead. They just had the deputy commissioner of the building department also indicted.
Yeah,
come on.
That's why we need an audit of the building department.
Absolutely.
And I want to talk a little bit about money because we all know whether it's a presidential election or a town supervisor position, if you have money, it helps, right? You can send out literature. So I want to talk about this.
Yes and no.
Right now, Laura Gillen, who is currently town of Hempstead supervisor and is looking to be reelected, has a war chest of $606,000 compared to Don Clavin, who has $141,000 for now. And does that matter, do you think? I mean, when you ran for office,
I ran my entire election on the $3,000 or $4,000 that I raised myself. I bought my own literature. I did everything because you know what? Yes, money's important in these larger races like the supervisors race because let's get realistic. They want to get some stuff on TV, radio ads, and that kind of stuff. Isn't important. But Clavin, he's going to get money. They're going to dump money right before the election. The Republicans always will do a dump of money right before. So
you think he'll get. So let's talk about some of these other races because I see Bruce Blakeman has $45,000 while Shari James has $23,000. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, I see here that Sylvia Cabana has $15,300 in her war chest. Kate Murray has $57,000.
Well, she probably still has a campaign account from when she ran as supervisor.
So I want to talk about one last race that we have not discussed, which is the race for receiver of taxes. Chandra Ortiz is the Democratic candidate. I don't even know who the Republican candidate is, and whoever it is didn't show up.
Another one in a no-show.
Unbelievable. Okay, so Chandra Ortiz is a real estate attorney for 20 years, and she says a town of Hempstead resident for 30 years, and she talked about tax certiorari and condemnation. It's her first time running for office. What was your opinion of her?
Well, there's a lot of good first-time candidates this year, I think. She was very impressive. It's the first time I've heard her speak, and she was very much like the other ones, were very on point, knew the issues, and knew what needed to be done. It's refreshing sometimes.
It is refreshing, and I wish her good luck. So the last thing that we wanted to talk about is voting early.
Yes,
not voting often, but voting early
no,
in
it's
Nassau
not Chicago.
County. And what's interesting to me is this is the first time that I think different counties are doing this, but Nassau within New York State, Nassau County has 15 locations where people can vote early.
Yes.
in Glen
And
Head.
it's very important.
Yeah.
I think it's early voting. I think is going to really redefine this election this year.
Yeah, I mean, Glen Head, Mineola, Elmont, Valley Stream, Lawrence, West Hempstead, Rockville Center, North Merrick, Wantagh, Floral Park, Garden City, Hempstead, Massapequa, Plainview, and Hicksville. That's really all over the county. And the dates are Saturday, Sunday, during the week. I mean, there's really a plethora
I
of
believe
dates
it's starting
and times.
October 26th. correct?
October 26th is the first date, and the Board of Elections is open off until 8 p.m. on those days.
Yes.
So how do you think that early elections will, first of all, how does that manifest? What do you do for early elections? How do you vote early? And second, how do you think, Carl, that will affect the turnout?
Well, with early voting, my understanding is you can go to any of those places and you will be, it's all electronic. So your name and everything is in there. You sign, I believe you sign electronically, and then you're locked out from voting anywhere else because you've done it. You can go to any voting area that you listed, and then you'll see more in the paper.
So you don't even have to live in that community.
No, just say you live in say you work in Hicksville, and
you live in Franklin
Square. You can vote there. You'll be in there. I think it's going to be big for the seniors. They're a big voting block in Nassau County, town of Hempstead, and a lot of times people vote with the weather.
Yeah, but a lot of seniors vote Republican. So does that mean that
doesn't matter?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Listen, Republican. How I always look at it, I don't care if it's an R or a D or not. Whatever you doesn't matter to me. You need to exercise your right to vote. And how better to understand what the electorate feel without early voting?
I agree. And the other thing is, I love the idea of early voting because I can do it, number one, when it's convenient for me.
Correct.
And number two, I don't have to deal with candidates or their representatives at the polling places trying to press the flesh and get me to vote.
Oh, I bet they'll be there.
Oh, I hope not.
I bet they'll be there. But I think, like I said, for seniors, for millennials, for people that are on the move, that constantly, how many people work so hard in election day, oh my God, I forgot to vote today. Now you don't have to worry. Because people have such busy schedules. This was probably one of the better legislations I've seen in a long time because it's giving people more access to vote.
And this came from Albany, right?
Yes. It was one of the first things that the new Democratic majority pushed through. And it makes sense because seniors can come out because if it's raining or cold on election day, seniors and people with children aren't coming out.
Right.
Now they have an opportunity to schedule it.
No, it's great. Okay, so that's it for our 19th episode. Thank you, Carl, for coming on the podcast. That was so interesting. And to our listeners, be sure to download this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you are there, please rate us with a review that might start. I just heard on the LI Law podcast that Nassau County residents may choose from 15 locations for early voting on 9 days. So listeners, there's no excuse not to vote. The stakes are too high, and your vote is important, so please go out to vote. The LI Law podcast lets you know what's going on Long Island and is your podcast for local tips which educate and entertain. Thanks for listening.